Over the past few seasons of the EdTech Curio Cabinet, we've explored a wide landscape of educational curiosities. We began with the persistence of educational structures that seem remarkably resistant to change, the lecture that continues to endure, the assessment systems that remain deeply familiar even as technology evolves around them, the productive struggle that often sits at the center of meaningful learning. We then explored the accelerating role of technology in education, artificial intelligence, adaptive learning systems, academic integrity, personalized feedback, along with the growing tension between efficiency and the depth of learning environments. In our third season, we widen the lens even further. We examine the educational systems that shape societies themselves. Global approaches to mathematics and engineering education. We looked at trust-based educational cultures, the research universities and innovation ecosystems around them, and the expanding idea of a globally connected classroom. Across all of these conversations, one deeper pattern kept emerging. Education evolves through a continuous dialogue between humans and their tools. And today, that dialogue is entering a remarkable new chapter. For the first time in history, many of the tools surrounding education no longer simply store knowledge. Increasingly, they generate it. They explain, they summarize, they simulate conversation, and they produce images, essays, solutions. And they do so with a fluency that can feel surprisingly human, which raises a whole new set of educational questions. What happens to learning when explanations become instantly available? How do students develop mastery in a world filled with on-demand intelligent assistance? And what role will educators play when machines can increasingly participate in teaching and assessment? And perhaps most importantly, what aspects of learning remain fundamentally human? This season of the EdTech Curio Cabinet explores these questions. We'll examine the evolving relationship between human cognition and intelligent machines. We'll look at the paradoxes emerging around artificial intelligence and education, the promises and the tensions surrounding automation, creativity, and assessment, and the ways educators may shape a future where technology supports human flourishing rather than narrowing it. And as always, each episode will explore 4 curiosities along the way. We'll look at the artifact, a tool, technology, or educational practice shaping the modern landscape. We'll look at the pattern, the historical or cultural forces that help explain why it emerged, and the paradox, the unexpected tension hidden between the surface, and finally a signal, a glimpse into where learning may be heading next. Because the most interesting questions in education rarely concern technology alone. They concern people. They concern how they think. They concern how they grow, and how societies cultivate understanding across generations. So let's open the cabinet once again. Welcome to Season 4, Human Learning in the Age of Intelligent Machines. I'm going to set the scene for a scenario that will be mostly quite familiar to us all. A student sits alone at their desk late at night. Tomorrow morning, they have an exam, more specifically, a calculus exam. Their textbook is open to a page filled with symbols, scratch pads nearby filled with partially erased questions, maybe some crinkled up. And the evening proceeds with various moments of frustration, followed by flashes of understanding and more scribbling. But now this familiar scene begins to diverge, and increasingly another presence joins the table. A conversational artificial intelligence. The student types a question. Can you please explain integration by parts? Within seconds, a response appears. And it's not a simple definition. It's a personalized explanation. Step-by-step reasoning with worked examples, possibly some encouragement, alternative approaches. And the student asks another question, and then another and another, and the system patiently responds every single time. There's no office hours required, no waiting for email replies, just an immediate explanation. Now, for generations, access to expert guidance was constrained by geography, class sizes, time, and institutional resources. But now, explanation itself has become abundant. And that changes something important about learning. Because throughout the history of education, explanation has held tremendous power. The person who could explain often became the teacher. The book that explained became the curriculum, and the institution that organized these explanations became the university. But today, explanation is becoming automated, which raises a really intriguing educational question. If machines can increasingly explain almost anything, what becomes more important for humans to learn? EdTech Curio Cabinet. I'm Christina, and in each episode we explore the evolving world of education through 4 lenses: the artifact, the educational tool, practice, or technology shaping how people learn; the pattern, the deeper historical forces that explain how we arrived here; the paradox, that tension or contradiction hidden beneath the surface; and then finally the signal, a glimpse into where education may be heading next. In this Curio, we explain the rise of machines that explain. Now, one of the most striking characteristics of modern generative artificial intelligence systems is their ability to explain. Large language models can now produce surprisingly coherent explanations across an enormous range of subjects. A student can ask for a simpler explanation from the one that's first received. They can ask for another example, potentially a practice problem, or even feedback on their own reasoning. And that system can respond conversationally in real time. And in many ways, this resembles a long-standing aspiration within educational technology. For decades, researchers explored the idea of intelligent tutoring systems. Educational psychologist Benjamin Bloom famously described what became known as the 2 sigma problem: the observation that students receiving one-on-one tutoring often perform better, dramatically better, than students learning through conventional classroom instruction. The challenge was scale. Human tutoring is very effective. It is also extraordinarily expensive and difficult to provide universally. Educational technologies repeatedly attempted to narrow this gap. They delivered adaptive learning systems, stepwise feedback engines, automated hints, but conversational AI introduces something very different: fluid dialogue. The interaction feels less like navigating software and more like participating in an ongoing conversation. And importantly, these systems reduce friction around asking questions. And we've all experienced, or at least observed this. Students often hesitate to ask instructors for clarification. Some worry about embarrassment, others fear looking unprepared, and others simply just run out of time. Machines, however, remain infinitely patient. A student can ask the same question 5 different ways without any social consequence. And from one perspective, this represents a remarkable expansion of educational access. Human beings have always built tools that serve to extend. We extended our memory with writing. Books expanded access to knowledge across generations. Libraries organized this information at scale for all to be able to access. Calculators accelerated computation. And then search engines transformed retrieval. Now, each of these tools changed education in really profound ways. The calculator, for example, generated enormous educational debate. Would students lose foundational arithmetic skills? Or would the dependence on machines weaken their mathematical understanding? Yet over time, education adapted. Basic numeracy remained important, while higher-level mathematical reasoning became increasingly emphasized. And a similar pattern emerged with search engines. Students no longer needed to memorize information in the same way previous generations did. The educational value of memorization shifted. Retrieval became easier, evaluation became more important. Now, today's generative AI systems represent another evolution in this long pattern of cognitive extension. But there's an important distinction here. Search engines retrieve information. These commonly used AI systems synthesize and explain it. That subtle difference has a real impact on education, because explanation occupies a central place in how humans learn. Teachers explain, mentors explain, your peers explain, your parents explain. Explanation is deeply connected to understanding itself. And throughout history, educational institutions have often been structured around access to these explanations, which means the widespread automation of explanation may influence education far beyond simple productivity gains. Now, at first glance, better explanations seem unquestionably beneficial, and they often are. Students who previously lacked access to support may now receive assistance instantly. Learners can move at their own pace, and these complex concepts can be reframed in multiple ways. But beneath this progress lies an important educational tension. Learning is not merely exposure to explanations. In many cases, learning emerges through effortful mental reconstruction. Now, psychologists studying cognition have repeatedly found that certain forms of difficulty strengthen long-term understanding. Struggle can deepen retention. Retrieval practice strengthens memory, and problem-solving effort improves transfer. This idea appeared earlier in our series through the concept of desirable difficulties. And conversational AI introduces a fascinating new variation of this challenge. When explanations become effortless to obtain, students may engage differently with uncertainty itself. Moments that once required sustained reflection can now be bypassed very quickly. Confusion becomes easier to escape, and this intellectual discomfort becomes easier to smooth over. Now, the paradox is subtle. Systems that improve access to explanation may simultaneously reduce some of the cognitive effort that it takes to create durable learning. And yet the answer is unlikely to involve rejecting the technology altogether. After all, educational history rarely moves backwards. Once these powerful tools emerge, societies tend to integrate them into learning rather than abandon them. The more meaningful question may concern how educational systems adapt around these tools. Perhaps certain foundational struggles become more important to preserve intentionally. Perhaps educators increasingly design activities where reasoning processes remain visible. And then perhaps classrooms shift towards interpretation, synthesis, debate, and application rather than simple explanation delivery. Because explanation alone has never guaranteed understanding. Anyone who has taught knows this instinctively. Students can sometimes repeat an explanation perfectly while still lacking any deep conceptual mastery. And occasionally, genuine understanding emerges only after some confusion, experimentation, and failure, which implies something important about human learning. Understanding is not simply transferred from one mind to another. In many ways, it is constructed. As intelligent systems become increasingly capable of explanation, the role of educators may evolve in very critical ways. Teachers have always done far more than deliver information. They motivate, they contextualize, they mentor, they cultivate curiosity, they recognize misunderstanding in their students, they create social environments for learning, and they help students develop confidence and intellectual identity. These human dimensions may become even more important in AI-enhanced educational environments. In the years ahead, educators may increasingly function as designers of cognitive experiences, helping students navigate uncertainty, structuring meaningful struggle, creating opportunities for collaboration and reflection, and then guiding learners toward this discernment and judgment of learning. And perhaps more importantly, helping students learn how to think alongside increasingly capable machines, because the future of education may involve a new form of intellectual partnership. Machines capable of generating explanations at extraordinary scale, and humans capable of asking meaningful questions, evaluating ideas, and connecting knowledge across these contexts, assigning human meaning to what they learn. The machine may explain, but learning still belongs to the learner. And educators may remain essential guides in helping that learning become deep, reflective, and profoundly human. Throughout the history of education, access to explanation has carried enormous value. Teachers, books, institutions, they've long served as guides through difficult ideas. And now intelligent systems are making explanation available at an extraordinary scale. And as always, the deeper educational questions emerge beneath the technology itself. How much struggle helps learning deepen? What kinds of effort build lasting understanding? And how should educational systems evolve when assistance becomes instantly available? The machine may increasingly help explain ideas, but understanding still develops through human thought, reflection, and experience. Educational technologies continue to evolve rapidly, but the deeper patterns of learning remain remarkably persistent. That's how we keep the cabinet open. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio cabinet.